Welcome to Software Leaders Uncensored with Steve Taplin.
Welcome to Software Leaders Uncensored, where tech leaders drop the filters and just tell it like it is. I'm your host, Steve Taplin, serial technology entrepreneur, a guy who's launched 30 companies, had 20 of those fail, but scaled 10 of those to success. And I turned that roller coaster of a ride into my book. It's called Fail Hard, Win Big. And this is where I teach you how to turn failure into your biggest competitive advantage and how custom software played a defining role in every win. Now I'm the CEO of Sonatify Technology. We're a US-based software engineering firm that has resources throughout Latin America. We help existing engineering teams scale. And today I am joined by Tom Doyle, who is the CTO of Medidata. Tom has been a longtime engineering and data sciences leader, now is CTO out of New York City. Tom, welcome.
Thanks, Steve. It's great to be here.
You bet. Tom, if you would, walk our listeners through the journey of your career and what led you to your current role.
I got to where I was in a very planned and deliberate way. I think the reality is I made a lot of adjustments along the way. Not to age myself, but I grew up as a software engineer and a mathematician during the dot-com boom. And there it looked like my future was all in front of me. I was going to graduate from the University of Waterloo in Canada and go off into a career in tech. I think the world had some other ideas in mind.
And I just thought you could work for one or two startups, cash out and be set, right?
It wouldn't be a bad life, let's say. Instead, I joined a life sciences company. I joined Boehringer Ingelheim. And really that set my career off in arguably a very different direction, one that was very focused on health technology. I'll say for your listeners who are in health tech, one, I thank you for all the hard work that you do. But you probably feel the same as I do. It's a real infectious thing to think not only can we build cool software, can we create great user experiences, but we can have a really meaningful impact on it. And so I spent a lot of my time at this sort of intersection of technology and analytics, working in large pharmaceutical companies. I started at Boehringer Ingelheim. I worked for a time also with Johnson & Johnson. Always looking for how we can bring sort of the math side, the analytics side to technology to uncover the secrets that data is really telling us. And in 2019, I came over to Medidata, where that's really the ethos of the company and the opportunity that's in front of us in clinical research. And from there, really the story kind of wrote itself in as AI really started to take hold and technology evolved and we could start to do more and more things. Medidata really grew in that space, and so did I. So I would say it's really been a journey of making some adjustments along the way, taking advantage of opportunities that were in front of me. But also, I got really lucky about how technology has accelerated so quickly over the last 2 decades.
It's, I think we all make our own luck, and I don't think there's any such thing as a business plan or a career plan that's not fluid. Because you can write it down, you can go for it, and the world's changing so quickly, you have to adapt or die. So I love it. Well, tell us more about Medidata.
So Medidata is, we've been around for about 26 years now in the clinical research space. It began right here in New York City, really revolutionizing the way that clinical trials operated in terms of data capture at sites. You can imagine over the last, 2.5 decades, there's been a lot of changes in the way that healthcare broadly and clinical research has operated, the introduction of more and more technology. But over the last 10 years, we've been really focused on the advances of AI and how data analytics can really not only inform better trial design and better patient experience, but can also make trials run much, much faster. And that's what Medidata is very focused on, is how do we create a better patient and site experience? How do we create a faster environment for innovation for our customers who are doing such wickedly awesome things, bringing new novel medicines to the market.
What a phenomenal mission that your company has, and something that all of us need, and we need to constantly see improvements. Every aspect of healthcare and pharma and clinical trials is an area for constant improvement, to say the least. Now, I want to talk more about Medidata, but first, how did you land this position with Medidata?
So I previously was responsible for data science practice at Johnson & Johnson. And we were building an AI business at Medidata, really leaning into the opportunity that we saw. And this was before A lot of those investments were coming online from a number of our competitors or the market generally. I think Metadata was really at the front end of that curve, and we're making a lot of hires to build that up, and I was part of that.
So did you apply online? Did you know somebody? Like, how did
Come
you
on,
land
Steve,
the
you know how
role?
this works. It's all about the networking part and who you know. I came over with some other folks who were familiar with metadata, were familiar with the executive team, and that's kind of how it all got started.
Tom, I have to laugh. Everybody hopes somebody says a different answer than that. Then it's your network, it's your network, it's your network. I think people are listening, praying, saying, oh my gosh, I want to know how to be a CTO by clicking easy apply on LinkedIn. And it
Well,
doesn't
next
quite
time I'll
work.
tell you I have this like really a smart secret on how to write a good CV, and like that's what you send in. But until then, the reality is it is about building out that network, meeting the right people, and being open to really new ideas.
I love it. So, how is metadata working towards improving patient outcomes with technology? Give us some insights here.
I mean, we see really there's three big levers. So I think the first and most obvious is acceleration. No one says, "Hey, let's develop new novel treatments slower than we have in the past."
I
We
have a
always
great idea and let's roll it out in 10 years.
That's right. So we're an industry that is all about getting it right and getting it right the first time because it's so important for patients. But nevertheless, especially since COVID-19, we've really seen pressure on how can we go faster and make that the normal operation, if you will. Can we continue to take out steps in the process or automate steps? And so technology and AI in particular, of course, play a big role in that. I think as importantly, and maybe even arguably more importantly, is metadata has been very focused also on like the insights that help us make better, faster decisions much earlier. So in clinical trials, that means how do we use the experience that we've had from the past, the models that we build to get to better trial designs that are more approachable to patients, that reach the right patients, that are designed in such a way that they're more likely to succeed for all the right reasons and not fail for the wrong reasons. And so a big part of our focus is also on insights. And then the third that I'm very proud of is metadata very early on recognized the importance of the experience. The experience of the clinical professionals that work in the metadata platform, the more than million users that we have, but very importantly, patients and caregivers that are a part of this clinical trial journey, and recognizing the very unique role that they have, but also the unique position they're in. These are people who maybe are struggling with very serious illness, and we ask a lot of them in clinical trials. And how can we make technology that's more approachable for them? And so we've launched patient insights programs and patient boards that advise us on how to build software that's delivers value and a better experience also for patients. So we're equally focused on the experience side of
Tom, educate me. How have clinical trials changed over the past 20 years in terms of, 20 years ago it took, X amount of time, and now how has that evolved?
Someone told me once that big innovation, 3 decades ago was like multi-part paper. And so that will give you an idea of how far we've come, right? Now you're talking about a lot of digital biomarkers and instruments that are capturing data directly from patients that are getting a much more holistic view of the patient experience and disease progression. So we have a much better capability, if you will, to understand how patients are progressing in trials and really the overall impact that therapies are having on them. I'd say that's one of the biggest changes. Unfortunately, though, it's not that trials have gotten cheaper or easier to run. And I think that's something as an industry we struggle with is how do we bend this cost curve, so to speak, to bring new therapies to market faster, but also lower the cost burden so that we can bring more of them or take more shots on goal to really get the things to market that are going to have the biggest impact on patients.
Gotcha. So, how is AI impacting clinical trials and the healthcare industry in a whole from your perspective?
At risk of sort of overhyping the impact, this is probably, we are going to look back and say this is one of the more transformational moments in our industry. And a lot of that is because there is so much that we still can learn in clinical research and in healthcare broadly. And it's only now that we've got the compute capacity, the algorithms, and the technology that helps us start to really unlock those. And that's AI. I think I mentioned before these like 3 dimensions we're really looking along. AI is changing the way that users interact with technology. If you think over the last 2 decades-ish, it's been about teaching people how to use tech. Now it's more about teaching the tech how to work with people. And I think that's going to open up entirely new opportunities, in particular in areas where you have aging populations or people who are less familiar with technology. There's just new opportunities to make trial technology more accessible.
Like, I like how you frame that of used to teach people how to use technology. Now it's about teaching technology how to work with people. I think that's a great way to frame it.
I mean, I don't know a single technologist who on the weekend doesn't play help desk to some part of their family. And so I think that's a part that we'll really see change over time, that the technology that we use is more adapting to the user. It's learning what is most important to them. It's helping them, as a companion, working alongside them to make them smarter, faster. These are all these are realities, and they have a big impact on areas like clinical research, but also drug discovery and manufacturing and healthcare. Again, I think we are going to look back and say, like, this was the moment where we really started to unlock the true potential of technology.
So, what are some current cutting edge projects you guys are working on, pushing the envelope and making things happen?
Metadata is really lucky that given our size and the amount of time we've been in industry, we get to work with some of the best and the brightest and really forward-looking companies who are doing just some really, really cool things. They range anywhere from reimagining what clinical trials look like using more synthetic data, for example, to lower the number of patients you might need to enroll in trials, making sure that you're picking the right patient populations, you're measuring the performance of the drugs the right way. So I think those are some of the real big transformations. On the other side, we are also really aggressively going after how do we just do things faster. For your listeners who are familiar with how trials operate, if they've been part of it, they'll know the protocol or the instructions of the trial are so important. We are working on how do we make those protocols better, but also how do we take that and then generate the entire trial from that. So going from a protocol finalization to a study build, for example, faster than we've ever. And the reason for that is just like these are all things that these are steps that don't necessarily add to ensuring the safety and efficacy of the product. They're necessary, but if we can make them faster, that is just taking time out of a trial that's getting a product to a market, a therapy to a patient faster. So those are some of the areas that we're really focused on.
Gotcha. So, as a tech leader, what are some of the biggest challenges you're facing now?
I think one of them is there is no end to like the good ideas that we could go after. Recognizing the feasibility, the readiness, the depth of data to be successful in some of them, I think can be tricky, but also the readiness of our industry or users to adopt them. On one hand, we are an industry that thrives on innovation. On the other, there's a lot of risk in the pharmaceutical development process. And so that creates this paradox where we want to do things better and faster, but also we need to make sure that we are taking appropriate risk in that. And so that means that we need to balance like where our investments in areas like AI, for example, are going. We want to go after those big transformations, but we also need to make sure that we're delivering value today. We're doing also the accelerations. We're making like the experience better. So getting that balance right, I think is a unique opportunity for not just, I guess, for our industry, but I think all of it.
So, Tom, what's your take? MIT last month put out a report that 95% of generative AI pilots at companies were failing. And their definition of failing was zero or negative ROI. As a tech leader at a cutting edge healthcare and life sciences company, why do you think that is?
First, don't send that to my CFO because that's just going to create all kinds of headaches, right?
CFOs hate this show. You'll be fine.
I mean, I think part of it is you got to start out with the right problem statements. You got to have a real use case that you're going after that has both an opportunity to have success, but where you can clearly identify, the value you're going to get, whether it's like acceleration, it's cost reduction, it's opening a new market, whatever it is. And if you're not clear on that, then I think you're setting yourself up for, at best, a lukewarm proof of concept, if you will. I think the other is recognizing the limitations of the technology or data that we have. This is not magic. This is real software engineering. This is real data science work. And it's important to recognize what we are capable of and what still there's more work to do. In our space, we see, for example, in clinical research, there's a lot of opportunity to do operations improvements at scale. Real scientific, looking at surrogate endpoints and understanding how specific patients might respond to therapy, that's a lot more targeted. And it makes us really think, do we have the data that would support the models, for example, to really succeed in those? So that is an art as much as it is a science. And it's important to get right. I think it's really easy to go in maybe a little bit overconfident in your ability to deliver on some of these. And that's also not really a recipe for success.
It's my take that companies have been jumping too quickly, not choosing the right use cases. And the constant story I hear is they get 90% of the way there, but just can't get that last 10%, and they give up.
Yeah, there's probably a lot of truth to that. Or, they might find, hey, that was an interesting, it's an interesting exercise, but I'm not going to take it beyond feasibility study. We're really interested in how can we take things like broadly to the market? How can we have the biggest impact for patients? And so we're trying to be real selective about the things that we go after that we think realistically we can do that with.
So Tom, as a CTO of a large technical organization, you guys are a subsidiary of a public company. How do you weigh being technical enough to give the right guidance to the engineering team while putting it in dummy language so the non-technical executives and financial folks and investors and board can get the comfort of the technology initiatives, which I think this is the hardest part of being a CTO. How do you attack that?
The great thing is the market is helping me a lot in that there's so much interest and excitement in technology, in particular in AI, that a lot of people are reading up and listening to folks like you about it and things like that. And that's really helping because we can have more substantive and more technical discussions, I guess, if you will. But in the end, it's all about like, what is the outcome that we're driving? And so much of my discussions with our industry partners, for example, is about that, the problems we're trying to solve, the opportunity we're going after together. But also a lot of our engineers are equally focused on that. If they're focused on building tech for tech, then to your point before, we run the risk of landing in the programs that don't go anywhere. But if we stay really focused on like, what is the delivery for the patient or what is the delivery for the user, we are probably in a better place. So I would say we're all advantaged from talking more about the outcome we want, not always about the technology or the tech stack that we might be putting in place to deliver that.
Gotcha. So Tom, we both lived through the dot-com boom. We've been around a little bit. I wrote a whole book on my brutal lessons of how to use failure to make sure you're pushing yourself and to succeed. What are some brutal lessons you've learned throughout your career?
I mean, what I think the most, and it's sort of how I let off, is it's great to have a plan and to think about what the future should offer. As a CTO, a lot of that is about our strategy and where we're going, but not to be so wedded to that you don't take advantage of opportunities that present themselves or really changes in the market. And I think that's one of the really important lessons. Metadata was, in a way, we adapted quite well during, for example, the COVID era and the growth of vaccine studies and the importance of these very large, very fast moving trials. I think in a different world, had we not done that, it would have been a very different outcome for us and, arguably for the market generally. I think everyone at some point in their career has this moment where they can really think about what is in front of them and how that is changing the course. And then it's really, does that have a lasting effect? I mentioned in our industry that lasting effect is this hunger, this desire to go faster and to not accept doing things the old way. And so that's really a big part of, what we're trying to embrace and what I personally am trying to embrace in my own career.
Well, Tom, there's no doubt you have a passion when you're talking about this. And what are some of the key aggressive outcomes you'd like to see happen for you and your organization over the next 3 to 5 years?
I mean, I'd love to see us take years out of the the clinical development life cycle, how long it takes to go from, not to use the sort of industry term, but a NME declaration or identification of a new therapy all the way through to the market. Of course, we want to make that faster. Selfishly, I want to see us deliver software faster too. Like I said, there are so many great ideas and so many great opportunities. We're limited in some way by our ability to dream of them, but then how fast can we implement them at a high degree of quality and get them in and adopted by our customers? I think we can keep shortening that. And a lot of that is embracing these same technologies internally. How it's great that we have taken a AI everywhere approach in our platform. We're thinking AI first in the experience of our customers, but I'd really be failing if I was not also thinking about what does that mean for a development organization. We also need to be AI first in the way that we approach problems. We need to be hyper focused on getting data that helps us look at a problem maybe differently. And that's something that we're very focused on as a R&D organization and metadata more broadly.
So from an engineering perspective, have you guys, and it's hard to say settled on or integrated certain AI tools into the development and engineering process because it changes so quickly, but have you guys found ones that your team is like, such as Windsurf or Cursor or Anthropic, Claude,
We have. So you're right. From a model perspective and from like foundation models, we've been quite open. We're often looking for what's the right technology for the right problem. And then we look for patterns where we can like repeat that. Excuse me. For our own internal use, we've sort of adopted the same approach where we think like all engineers will benefit from Copilot, for example, and then we will leverage certain specialized technology in specific areas or for specific engineers where we get like an outsized improvement from it. But you're right; it also means that we've got to be quite flexible to adopt new tech as it's available.
I've often seen in some cases, engineering leaders will give their engineers the freedom to use different tools, but not set a structure for the organization. And I think all the engineers like playing with it, but then you run into the issue of less productivity because you're trying to manipulate the tools so much. And if your organization doesn't adopt it, you're not going to continue using that specific one anyways. How have you approached that?
It's funny. I was laughing because it's this forever balance, right? You
That's right.
can't on one hand embrace innovation and say you want to be a company that's really built around new innovative thinking and then stifle everyone who has a new idea or a new technology or partnership they want to form. But at the same time, we can't chase everything. And so what we've really done is we tried to look at where are areas where we really need to be standard because it drives a tremendous amount of efficiency, faster onboarding of engineers, more flexibility to move people across teams, bring people to problems, for example, versus where do we want to really unleash the creative thinking and really try out some new things. We also do that, I think, not dissimilar from probably a lot of other tech companies. We host internal hackathons, for example, where we can really let people loose. I will say, though, that our industry and life sciences requires that we always keep a sort of foundational level of governance around that because of patient privacy, because of intellectual property, et cetera. So it will never be that we just can like do anything and try anything. We certainly have to always be cognizant about how the infrastructure and how this data is hosted and where it is and all of these. And our InfoSec and privacy team keep us always on the right side of that. They've been great partners.
And that's a good thing because many times the CTO wants to kill that organization. That is a good thing. Well, Tom, thank you so much for getting uncensored with us today. I love the passion you have in your mission. I mean, your company is improving healthcare, which is essentially saving people's lives. I can't think of a better mission. And you're a rare leader who has worked his way through and has a passion each step of the way. Before we wrap, Tom, any final no BS advice you have for tech leaders out there who are trying to build, scale, or even just survive in these current times?
I mean, Steve, first, thanks so much for the time. And to anyone who's listening, I think that the biggest one is like to keep being creative and keep trying. Just because something hasn't worked before doesn't mean it won't work the next time. We have to take a lot of shots at certain problems before we find the one that works. Technology in our industry is full of people who failed many times before they really hit. That's true in drug discovery. That's true in technology innovation. And so I would just encourage people to not get discouraged, but keep working at it.
Love it. Tom, thank you so much. That's it for this episode of Software Leaders Uncensored. I'm Steve Taplin. If you enjoyed the show, go ahead and hit subscribe. If you didn't enjoy it, well, we're just going to share it with your competitors. Might be the edge they're looking for. Remember to fail hard, win big, and always build what matters. See you next time.
That's a wrap. Another great episode of Software Leaders Uncensored. Thank you guys so much for listening. I really appreciate it. It's a lot of fun doing this show. I love talking with great tech leaders. As a side note, if you're interested, check out my new book, Fail Hard, Win Big. This is the story of how I built 30 companies, failed on 20, and turned 10 into multi-million-dollar wins. The common thread with all of them was custom software. Also, if you need software development help out there, my company, Sonatify Technology, we deliver world-class software development engineers out of Latin America. We have a solid track record of helping companies launch better products and faster. Thanks again for listening. Appreciate it and appreciate you.